Tell me how the Save As Symposium started.
Well, the Saber Symposium started, I can't remember which edition of IFO, probably the second edition of IFO. I can't remember the year, is it 2022? I feel like it's 2022. It was the year when a French sort of cultural official, let's put it that way, I think sponsored by the French Embassy in Canada, so right here in Ottawa, produced a kind of report on, let's say, the state of various institutions of what you can call patrimoine. If in French you say film de patrimoine, or archival film, if you want to call them so. Did a sort of overview of these institutions across provinces. And so Tom in particular,
Tom McSorley.
Tom McSorley, thank you very much.
Of course.
The head of the Canadian Film Institute. So when he got the report, he approached me, and first so we could sort of first discuss it and see what we could do with it during the upcoming IFOs. It was my first direct involvement with IFO. I was involved with a different festival called AFO, so I guess, which is the African Film Festival of Ottawa, which we started together in 2015 with the African embassies. And so IFO clearly, at least, maybe I can claim the inspiration for the you know what I mean, for the FFO part of it. Because in fact, AFO in my language, in Bamana, in West Africa, I mean, AFO, which means say it, speak it. But IFO in Bamana means my apologies. Actually, wish we could have a different connotation, considering our, let's say, stereotypes of our Canadian identity and so on and so forth. Anyway, so we sat down in this very office to see, how we would, in fact, strategize to bring this report to the public, and some of the events that would be organizing. I have to be honest, in fact, he had already done most of the work, frankly. I think my intervention begins, I guess, after this experience, because he involved me in a panel, I think, on that occasion, where I was, I think, with the Criterion Collection, kind of classics, etc. It was really important institution that dealt in one form or another with the question of film heritage. Now, for me, I was already, of course, working in that world. Because, of course, since 2017, I've been involved in something called the African Film Heritage Project. So the question of film heritage, the question of the archive have been part of my, both my on-campus and off-campus world. So it was natural for me to be involved in this at the first edition. And so after the end of the first edition, we sat down and said, okay, what are we going to do for the next edition? And that's where I suggested that, in fact, this initial edition of Save As could become, in fact, part and parcel of the very identity of IFO. Because obviously we have many international film festivals in this country, the biggest one being in Toronto. And so what would make this one stand out in particular? And so the feeling was that, my feeling at least, was that the archive could be one of the things that would make it stand out. Because, of course, in part, we are in Ottawa, the capital city of this country, which also means that many of the decision makers around the question of heritage broadly in this country, and certainly film heritage in this country, are centered here. The Minister of Heritage obviously is here. The Library and Archives Canada is obviously in this very city, not to mention all the other institutions, the NFB and all the, Montreal, Toronto, and different places. So I felt like, that we could do something more permanent. In other words, turn Save as a kind of permanent forum where we could think about the archive, where we could, as I often say in my archive classes, enhance, develop, and broaden what I refer to as archival consciousness. That's really the ideology or the idea behind this question of SAVA, but anchoring it in the Canadian context. So that means, of course, developing discourse around different debates around patrimony, heritage, film heritage in Canada, but in conversation with what's happening across the world, right? And so for the second edition, therefore, of SAVA, we said, okay, what if now we try to institutionalize the fact that we would, year after year, have a section of SAVAs, or a section of SAVAs, exactly, devoted to one major or one significant institutions whose work is really dedicated to the preservation of film heritage, the celebration of film heritage, the expansion of film heritage. And so the year after that, we decided to focus, for example, on the Bologna Cinematheque. And so since I've been working with them for the past, decade or so, it was natural for me to invite them here to come. They accepted the invitation. They were represented by my dear friend Cecilia Cianciarelli, who is really a fantastic and amazing force and person to work with in so many more ways than one. So she agreed to come. And so last year we featured the Bologna Cinematheque prominently. Why the Bologna Cinematheque? In relation to what I've been saying so far, because it is one institution that combines at least three features, certainly significant features. It is a film archive, one of the most important in the world, simply. They have the archives of some of the giants of cinema, certainly of Italian cinema. Think of, the Pasolini, the Antonioni, the Bertolucci, all these major figures of Italian cinema and world cinema more broadly. They have the paper archive of Charlie Chaplin, no less. I mean, you cannot sufficiently celebrate what they have in their vaults. That's one. They also are a film festival, or have a film festival. The film festival is called Il Cinema Ritrovato Film Festival. It is by far the most important archival film festival on the planet, at least in my books. Because, of course, it takes place typically the last week of June and early week of July in a city called Bologna, precisely, and brings together basically the archival holdings of as many film archives and cinematheques that we have around the world. The programming is original, and I myself have been involved in programming things there. In fact, I landed there because I was looking for the person, at least we consider, certainly one of the key, very earliest pioneers of African cinema, called Albert Samamashikli. They couldn't find much about him there, but we decided to make a program about him, and from there on, our relationship developed to what it is now. Anyway, it's important to celebrate them precisely as an open-minded institution, simply. Also as a place where, in fact, the history of cinema was often being rewritten through the practice of film programming, through the presence of some of the major film historians. So if you're a film historian, you would know people like David Borwell, for example, David Robinson, etc., who are masters in sort of the totality of the history of film or moments in film history, early cinemas and cinema, all these guys are there. So this means that, of course, as you go there, you discover, at least you're exposed to some of this work that you only read in, let's say, primers and film history and things like that. But you actually walk very physically into the history of cinema. But you also sometimes, some of the filmmakers are still alive, or the people they work with are still alive. So it's a very fascinating experience that I thought we should bring also here in Ottawa and share with the Ottawa audience. I think it worked out pretty well. This year the focus was on the UNAM, the National University of Mexico Cinematheque, which is a FIAF member, and just a fantastic one. Unfortunately, I was not able to take part in it. We also, in fact, we wanted to also invite the Film Foundation, which is one of the most important presences and institutions, and who really make probably some of the most important interventions in the field of film restoration and preservation. Simply, I think today they're almost at 850 films restored since they were created in 1990. It's a fabulous, fabulous work that we wanted to also feature here. Hopefully we'll be able to do it in the coming years. And we'll continue, of course, to give SAVAS that unique identity of making the International Film Festival of Ottawa not only a festival that looks to the contemporary and unfolding film, but also that really celebrate the past of cinema, the glorious history of cinema. Because of course, as we say, if you don't know where you come from, where you're going, try to really trace where you come from. This is an African proverb, by the way. That is the function of SAVAS for us, for new generations of filmmakers, film professionals, film academics, students, etc., to really retrace the past of cinema in order to precisely imagine what a future of cinema could potentially be. That is also one of the functions, the key functions of SAVAS. And so we hope to be continuing to do this, like bringing together archivists, of course, academics, of course, cinephiles, of course, students, of course, regular citizens, also policymakers, because one of our objectives is also to be able, at the very least, if not to influence, but at least to expose policymakers to these questions of the archive once a year at least. They could come, take it in, and see how perhaps some of the inside the conversation could be turned, translated, hopefully, into archive-friendly policies, into heritage-friendly policies that would, of course, benefit all of us. That's really